All right, joining me now here on the Matthew Filipowicz Show is Deepa Iyer. Deepa is an activist, writer, and senior fellow at the Center for Social Inclusion. She is the author of the new book, We Too Sing America, South Asian, Arab, Muslim, and Sikh Immigrants Shape Our Multiracial Future. You can find her at deepaiyer.com. Deepa, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Matthew.
All right, so Deepa, in the book, you write that many people actually have a sanitized version of post 9/11 America. Tell us, what exactly do you mean by that?
Sure. So one of the things that I do now is I teach Asian American studies at the University of Maryland. And what I've noticed is that many of my students who were 3 or 4 years old when 9/11 actually happened have a very incomplete understanding of what has happened in the 14 years since 9/11. And I think that many Americans actually have some gaps in knowledge when it comes to what actually the impact has been of some of our government policies and our political rhetoric on the communities I write about and focus on. And these are South Asian, Arab, Muslim, and Sikh immigrants in the United States. And so when I talk about the fact that there's a sanitized history or an incomplete history, what I mean is that we generally know that we are part of a war on terror. We generally know that we have national security policies and programs happening in our nation to, quote, preserve our security, but we don't really understand critically what the impact of those policies have been and how communities that I write about have been affected by them. So the book tries to fill some knowledge gaps through the lived experiences of people from these communities.
So let's dig into that. What has actually changed in these communities since 9/11? What are some of the big things that people may not know?
Well, what has happened generally in our communities is that there's been a scapegoating, a blaming of people who come from countries in the Middle East or South Asia, people who might practice Islam or perceive to practice Islam. There's been a scapegoating of these communities as potential terrorists, potential national security threats. And so when you have that sort of frame or that narrative and you hear it in the media, you hear it in terms of government rhetoric, and you even see it in terms of government policies that surveil or monitor or profile these communities. It basically has created an environment where many of our community members feel that they are under scrutiny all the time. So some actual examples that are revealed in the book or documented in the book, for example, one is that we've seen an increase in the levels of hate violence against our communities. So the book opens actually with a situation that occurred in August of 2012, not too long ago, in Oak Creek, Wisconsin, a suburb outside of Milwaukee, where a white supremacist barged into a place of worship that belongs to the Sikh community, the Sikh faith, and killed 6 people. So that's an example, a pretty horrific example of hate violence, but we also have seen discrimination at the workplace, bullying in schools, and the like. So these acts of discrimination and violence have occurred. And then another way in which we have seen the post 9/11 backlash manifest against these communities is actually through government actions and government policies. So, for example, I talk in the book about an immigration policy that required men 16 years and older from 25 countries in the world to register with immigration authorities. All these countries turned out to be Muslim-majority countries. Another example is, of course, what we call flying while brown, where people who are from these communities are often taken off planes because people feel afraid or uncomfortable having passengers from our communities there. And then lastly, government surveillance. We know, for example, and it's talked about in the book, that the NYPD in particular has actually engaged in a series of surveillance of our communities, for example, sending informants to mosques or actually monitoring the websites and meetings of Muslim students associations on campuses. So this backlash that includes government action, media narratives that conflate our communities with potential terrorism, and public acts of violence and discrimination, that's really been the lived experiences of many of our communities since 9/11.
In the book, early on, you write that you used to link race mainly with notions of multiculturalism and inclusion, and not so much with justice and equality and equity, but that's actually changed for you. Tell us, what do you mean by that?
Right. Well, I think generally in our country, we talk a lot and we believe in and have values around diversity and multiculturalism, how we want to actually embrace people from different cultures and backgrounds and faiths, that America is sort of a melting pot, right? And I definitely subscribe to that notion as well. Being an immigrant myself, I moved to Kentucky from India when I was 12 years old. So I definitely embrace that. And wanted to make sure that our workplaces and our institutions of education and the like reflected the diversity that is in our country and our communities. But I also learned in terms of the work that I have done with immigrant communities in particular, and after 9/11 in the South Asian community, that diversity and multiculturalism without justice and equity does not mean enough. So, for example, if you have a workplace where there are actually many people from different racial backgrounds that are represented in entry-level positions, you have kind of a diverse workplace. Well, if those individuals of non-white backgrounds don't get promoted, or they never can break the glass ceiling that exists, then you don't have equity, right? And so it's important that we couple diversity and equity together, because when we do that, we can actually see real changes in the outcomes of the ways in which people live and learn and work. And that's what I mean about coupling together diversity and equity.